Welcome back to our series on Carl Jung's The Red Book. We're on to chapter 4. This chapter is called The Desert. So at the end of the last chapter, Jung stood, nearly ready to give up on his descent into his soul, but the spirit stopped him and forced him back into himself. And that's where we are here beginning. And this chapter is titled The Desert, so let's start by taking a look at the actual work. As you can see, there's a big, large capital D that begins the artwork here for this chapter. So it's a human clothed in a white robe with a black snake around the D there, with a kind of yellow, whitish underbelly going around it there. And yeah, it surrounds the man, and the man is there inside of the letter D. So the symbolism here seems pretty straightforward to me, so I'm going to give it a shot. The man is an ancient monk or an ascetic, and his white robes that he's wearing reveals his intent, his purity of intent, and that he hopes to also purify himself. Now he's inside the D, so it seems that there might be some sort of inward journeying going on, as Jung's already let us know is where he's heading. So he's in the desert, but he's also inside the letter D, so it shows that inward journey is taking place. The D is wrapped by that black snake with the white, yellowish underbelly, and it's almost like it's trapping the man in there, that it's not letting him leave, which is interesting because Jung in this chapter talks about how important patience is within the desert. So the desire to leave that empty land of the soul back into things and events is very heavy to him, and that's where the danger of the snake might await for him. Now there's also the idea of going inward and going beyond the snake. And the snake here represents the black and white, the dark and light, possibly the good and bad, good and evil. And so he's going inward and he's going beyond that as well. So it's a movement beyond the way we rationalize and conceptualize the world, the way we move beyond our thoughts and desires with them, which I think the snake here symbolizes. You know, we can think about the story in the Garden of Eden where the snake offers the fruit of knowledge and we become aware of good and evil. And here the snake sort of represents that with this dark and light underside. So we're going into that and hopefully beyond that as well. And now let's move on to the text. So as Jung moves forward into his soul, he is shocked to find that his soul is a desert. He says, "The journey leads through hot sand, slowly waiting without a visible goal to hope for? How eerie is this wasteland! It seems to me that the way leads so far away from mankind. I take my way step by step, and do not know how long my journey will last." So why is the inward path something that's taken by so few people? Well, here we see that it's definitely a courageous act to go inwards into the desert. In many ways, it's the opposite of what we need for security. There's no visible goal, it leads away from mankind and other people, and there's no notion of how long this is going to take. So that's three pretty good reasons right there why one wouldn't go into their own soul, their inner desert. I mean, let me leave everything behind for an indefinite amount of time, heading towards something I'm not sure what exactly it is. You're not going to find that on any kind of travel brochure or anything. So upon arrival into this inner desert, Jung has the question that I think most of us would have. Why is my inner world a desert? So he answers himself that he's been living outside of himself, and that he has lived in men and events, that the outer world was his occupation. And he sees that after he moves beyond this, to really go inward, he's also going to have to move beyond his thoughts. So there's like this interesting hierarchy that appears where Jung knows that he has to move beyond men and events, and then he has to move past his own thoughts, and then finally he'll reach his own true self. And there's the saying that goes something like, how does it go? Little people talk about other people, moderate people talk about things and events, and great people talk about ideas. Well, in this case, Jung takes a further step that even beyond that is this deeper level of his true self. So if you think about it, this is kind of how the development of a person goes as well. As a baby, we know ourselves to the outer world. We know ourselves through our relationships with our mom, our parents, people we love, food, eating, playtime. And then as we get a little bit older, we start conceptualizing ideas. We start having our own thoughts. Events start to have more particular meanings to us. And then you even start to see the causal relations, and you develop concepts of likes and dislikes, what's right and what's wrong, and all of that. But then there's this third further step of moving beyond even this, and that's a step that not many people take. An easier way to see the development of a person is a movement from the pre-ego state to various states of ego identification, and then to the potential trans-ego state. And it's no wonder that Jung finds his inner self to be a desert, as the movement is away from your ego identification. So it's a setting aside, and I think that's one of the things that the desert here symbolizes, is that to really move inward, there's actually this setting aside of what you thought you knew, because what you thought you knew was based on your ego and the things that you've experienced and have identified with. And they're basically titles and ideas that you've assigned your own self. And to go deeper than that, you have to set that aside. So then what are you left with? Nothing. A desert. And so that's where Jung finds himself. Now, in the desert, Jung asks, "My soul, what am I to do here?" But my soul spoke to me and said, "Wait." I heard the cruel world. Torment belongs to the desert. So Jung acknowledges that he has to detach himself from his thoughts by turning his desire away from them. In the same way he had to set aside his preoccupancy with men and events, now he has to do the same with his thoughts. There's a simple meditation that many of you may know, but I just want to walk you through it, that helps one kind of silence their thoughts and try to move beyond them. It's just simply turning your attention to your natural breath. The key is to just continually return to your natural breath. To feel the in-breath, the out-breath, the movement of your chest expanding and contracting, and whenever any thoughts come in, you acknowledge them, say, "Yeah, I see you there, thought," and you turn your attention back to your breath. And you just follow that feeling of the breath, in and out. Now, anyone who has tried this knows how very difficult it truly is. That the mind is going to go bananas. You're going to be thinking about everything under the sun. But people who have stuck with it also know that eventually you do get to a place where you can stick with those feelings, where you can stick with that movement and not be preoccupied with your thoughts. But the key to that is the same as the key going into the desert, and it's patience. And to be gentle with yourself and understand it will take some time and effort to be able to sit down in a relaxed state and follow your breath without your mind going. It is highly probable that these experiences Jung is having, going into the desert and the sojourns that will follow, are taking place in a meditative subliminal state. And these states are available to you as well if you put in the work. If you meditate, journal, write, do all that sort of thing, record your dreams, practice sitting down by yourself, practice the meditation I just talked about. And if that meditation of focusing on your breath is too much, just sit down and be still and be quiet. Just do that for a period of time. You might even float away. Jung notes that even though his desert is a wasteland, that if he is patient and stays focused and attentive to the desert, the power of creative desire will come forth and create a garden full of flowers and fruit. He points to the outer world and how this growth and movement occurred when he allowed his creative desire, when he allowed his attention to stay focused in the outer world, that things would move and shift into place. And so he has this belief that the same thing will happen to his inner world. But you must be patient. Rudolf Steiner, the esoteric mystic, the founder of anthroposophy, biofarming, Waldorf education, and all sorts of great things, stated that he who is unwilling to repeat the same spiritual exercise over and over and over without any discernible results will not make it far along the spiritual path. So I know that's not very exciting, but the point is to turn your attention inward beyond your thought and ego and to have patience. Trust the process. Jung says pretty forwardly that most will not be able to bear the torment of waiting, that they will retreat back to men and events and become their fool since they are incapable of enduring beyond them. So that reminds me of the snake around the D. Once you go inwards and you head back out, you only become a fool and a slave to men and events because you've shown to yourself and to your soul and to your ego that you're incapable of moving beyond that. Now those that do endure and their soul becomes a garden and bears fruit and flowers do also need men and events and things and thoughts, but they become one's friend. You don't become a fool or a slave to them. You integrate with it. So that's the idea, is to integrate these two worlds, these two streams of inner and outer. But to do that, you have to be patient with the inner and let it grow. Jung ends this chapter by encouraging us to think about the ancients that went into the desert. He states, "The ancients lived their symbols, since the world had not yet become real for them. Thus, they went into the solitude of the desert to teach us that the place of the soul is a lonely desert. There, they found the abundance of visions, the fruits of the desert, the wondrous flowers of the soul. Think diligently about the images that the ancients have left behind. They show the way of what is to come." So there's a lot of interesting things to unpack in that, such as the idea that the ancients lived their symbols, that we can now we abstract those ideas, but that there's a certain reality to them as well. It makes you think about rituals and those acts that seem archaic to us, but they actually have a deep, deep significance. There's the idea that the ancients, they actually experienced the world consciously in a different way than we do. So like if you can imagine the taking of communion, then there was this real transfiguration that occurred of blood and body, that now we tend to see as metaphorical, even though the Catholic Church says it still literally happens. It's hard for our scientific rationalistic minds to accept that and to really embrace that. You know, there are cultures who talked about depression. What we would see, we would talk about somebody who's depressed, that they're sad. Ancient cultures might say that they were lacking water. And we would say, well, that's a nice metaphor, but they really meant it, that there was something about the water that they weren't retaining. There was this reality to their symbolism that they lived in. But I think we're going to get more into that as the Red Book progresses. Lastly, Jung reminds us that the Word is a creative act. In the beginning was the Word. It was the Logos that created the worlds. He leaves us with this: the words that oscillate between nonsense and supreme meaning are the oldest and truest. And certainly a rebuttal to those who think that ancient religions are of little to no value in our modern technological world. So that concludes Chapter 4, Into the Desert. I hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, peace.